The silence of the palace is often deceptive. Behind the heavy velvet curtains and the rigid protocols of the British monarchy, a storm was brewing, a storm that started not with scandal, but with a discovery that sent shockwaves through the very foundation of royal history. It began with a simple, anonymous listing at an international auction house. A piece of jewelry, rare, exquisite, and undeniably familiar, appeared on the block with an estimated value of $15 million. To the uninitiated, it was just another luxurious item for sale. To those who knew the history of Queen Elizabeth's private collection, it was a siren call disaster. When Princess Anne first heard the whisper, she didn't rush to the press. She was not a woman of dramatic gestures or public outbursts. Instead, she mobilized a quiet, efficient network of trust. As she began to cross-reference the auction item with the official, albeit strictly guarded, inventory of her late mother's personal effects, a chilling pattern emerged. It wasn't just this one tiara. The more she dug, the more she realized that the walls of the palace were hiding a systematic dismantling of history. Pieces that had graced state banquets, ceremonies, and milestones for decades were simply gone. A Victorian diamond brooch, a sapphire necklace with roots stretching back generations, and even an emerald choker. Each had disappeared from the record during routine checks, only to be hushed up by administrative sleight of hand. The trail, though carefully obscured, pointed toward an unauthorized movement of treasures. What shocked and the most was not the theft itself, but the lack of oversight. For years, someone had been operating with the assumption that the crown's private treasures were personal playthings, to be disposed of at whim. As Anne navigated the corridors of power, she found herself walking on a knife's edge. She knew that simply speaking out would be framed as a domestic dispute, or worse, as the actions of a daughter still trapped in a fog of grief. She needed more than suspicion. She needed proof. And in a twist of fate that felt like a final instruction from the Queen herself, that proof was delivered to her in an envelope found at Balmoral months after the funeral. The letter, addressed in the unmistakable, firm handwriting of the late Queen, contained a single directive. It named Princess Anne as the sole protector of the personal collection, the private possessions not belonging to the crown as an institution, but to the Queen as an individual. This was not just a document. It was a mandate. It was the Queen's final way of saying that she understood the nature of those around her, and she had ensured that when the time came, the person with the steadiest hand would be left to hold the keys. With this letter, the game changed. And was no longer just a daughter looking for answers. She was a designated guardian of a legacy, and she was about to hold everyone accountable. While Princess Anne armed herself with truth and documented authority, the opposition was far from idle. Camilla had not survived decades of fierce public hostility and institutional resistance by being passive in moments of crisis. She understood power not in its loud, confrontational form, but in its quieter, far more durable expression. The careful placement of a word, the strategic framing of narrative, and the ability to ensure that the version of events most favorable to her own position reached the right ears first. Before Anne could bring her findings to the broader family circle, Camilla had already reached Charles, and her approach was a masterpiece of psychological engineering. She did not launch into desperate denials or outright confrontations. That would have required engaging with evidence she could not yet fully refute. Instead, she reframed the entire situation with subtle, devastating precision. She suggested that Anne was not entirely well, not physically, but emotionally. The loss of Elizabeth had hit her with a force that those around her were only beginning to understand. Her grief, profound and genuine as it was, had allegedly begun to express itself in ways that were causing deep concern. The inquiries she was making, the people she was contacting, and the conclusions she appeared to be drawing were framed as the actions of a devoted daughter who had not yet found her way through an extraordinary loss. It was a portrait designed with surgical care, delivered directly to the one person whose response would determine everything that followed. Charles listened, caught in his most familiar and agonizing role, suspended between competing loyalties, visibly pained by the impossibility of the choice before him, and ultimately leaning toward the option that required the least immediate confrontation. He asked for time. He suggested the matter be handled quietly, hoping against hope that things might resolve themselves without requiring a catastrophic escalation. That hesitation bought Camilla invaluable space, but also forced the institutional machinery of the palace into motion. Senior advisors and private secretaries, whose ultimate loyalty was to the survival of the monarchy rather than any individual, realized that a ticking time bomb was hidden inside the inventory records. A quiet, internal review was initiated. Staff members who had previously been told to keep silent were approached again, not with threats, but with a quiet, undeniable clarity of purpose. Yet, secrets of this magnitude rarely stay locked behind palace walls forever. The story had already begun to bleed out into the specialist jeweler community, a tightly knit network where provenance moves faster than official statements. A photograph of the disputed tiara began circulating quietly among elite experts, carrying details that made its private auction listing impossible to ignore or justify. Within 40 hours, that photograph reached a seasoned investigative journalist. When the first guard reports finally hit the public domain, the reaction was immediate and visceral. This was no longer just an internal administrative dispute. It felt like a direct assault on the shared memory of a nation. Archival photographs of Queen Elizabeth wearing the tiara during her silver jubilee and state visits flooded social media. The public didn't see abstract luxury items. They saw fragments of collective history being quietly stripped away. And then, the name Diana entered the conversation, shifting the entire emotional register of the scandal from institutional oversight to profound betrayal. Balmoral was the only place left where anything could be resolved, and Balmoral had always been Elizabeth's place, which was precisely why it had been waiting for them to arrive there. The estate carries a quality of stillness that has nothing to do with quiet and everything to do with permanence, a sense that the ground itself has absorbed enough history to render ordinary human calculations temporarily beside the point. Elizabeth had understood this instinctively, returning here every year without exception. Choosing Balmoral for what was about to happen was not a logistical decision. It was a profound statement, and arrived first, moving through the estate with an unhurried, certain grace, completely free of the performance that accompanies those who know they are being watched. When Charles arrived, the heavy weight of the past weeks was etched plainly across his face, caught between competing loyalties and institutional pressure. Camilla arrived last, maintaining a meticulously polished composure, though those watching closely noticed the subtle, anxious gestures betraying her internal strain. The private chamber chosen for the gathering carried the unmistakable imprint of the late queen, and placed her dossier and the sealed letter right on the table in front of them. This time, with Charles sitting in the room, the institutional weight of the document could no longer be dismissed as a private grievance or grief clouding judgment. Elizabeth's unmistakable handwriting sat there as an absolute boundary. For several hours, Camilla attempted to deflect, question, and reframe the evidence, but meticulously assembled case built on undeniable facts does not tire or yield. When the silence finally fell, it carried the absolute weight of a verdict. No formal public announcement was released, but the aftermath spoke louder than any words. The auction listing was permanently withdrawn and a full, comprehensive inventory review was officially initiated. When stood directly beside Charles at a subsequent public engagement, her expression was that of someone who had finished what she came to do. The jewels were safely returned to their vaults, sparkling with their physical integrity intact, though their history had been permanently altered. For Camilla, life continued under a rearranged reality, where allies offered only careful, guarded words, and the atmosphere around her had fundamentally changed. For Charles, the lingering question of his hesitation during the crisis remained an open shadow on his legacy. Yet, the monarchy absorbed a vital lesson. That history can be stolen not just by outsiders, but by those entrusted to protect it. Ultimately, the jewels were safe, the reign they witnessed had closed, and the woman who spent 70 years guarding the crown had placed her trust in the exact right hands. Princess and didn't need a tiara to prove her loyalty, just a letter, a folder, and an unshakable, quiet certainty.